we are. Good afternoon. This talk is about QMON, uncomplicated monitoring for small environments. First of all, a few words about me. Some of you might not know me. I'm a computer scientist. I've been developing in lots of programming languages a few years ago, and then I came to computer security and information security. So I landed with a small company based in Cologne, right here. I'm doing web and mobile security, a few other things, infrastructure audits, basically, well, what you would call, well, some people would call it hacking, others call it security audits and penetration testing and so on, you know. I do have some spare time, and in my spare time doing, well, a few computer-related things. One of them is telephony software. I'm with a team of people who are installing telephony systems in huge hacker events. Might have seen that symbol. So I'm developing a few bits and pieces, and of course EuroTcl software for event phone. Then I'm doing a lot of open source development, and I'm a ham radio operator. Okay, a few EuroTcl related projects I've done over the years. Just a brief overview. Some script I called Apache subs, because I had so many Apache configuration files, always with virtual host, then very similar things. That's about it. So I automated it with, well, basically the EuroTcl subst. Then a library for the Yate telephony engine. The library, well, interfaces with the Yate telephony engine, so you can do things like, please enter your code. When you enter your code, you enter the conference or something. Then, for one project, I wanted to create a Debian repository, but all the tools available for creating actual Debian repositories were so unfitting, so I wrote a little EuroTcl script for assigning the directory listings or something. Then another thing, a printer library for small receipt printers, SPOS compatible. And of course, I wrote a validation server for YubiKeys. YubiKeys are these things that look exactly like that, and well, you press a button, so you have a one-time password. This one-time password has to be validated. You need a validation server for that. It's written in EuroTcl. Well, you can check out all these projects if you like, but this particular talk is not about these projects. It's about something entirely different. The QMON. Even though it's only, well, half an hour talk or something, we'll have what is the idea behind QMON, why did I write it, then I have a bit of an architectural overview, a few comments about old EuroTcl versions and how to be compatible with them, and we'll have SQLite backend and a few other examples. We'll see that later. Okay, it's all about monitoring. What I mean by monitoring is I do have a few servers, web servers, secure shell servers, FTP servers, whatever, but not that many of them, just like 3 or 2 or 4, just very few. And I'd like to know when they're up or down, or maybe the certificate expired or something else is wrong with them, the root is down, the hard disk is full, something like that. And normally you set up a huge monitoring system that can do loads of things, so you get notified when something happens. Basically that's what I did. I set up nagios. Do all of you know nagios? Yeah, most of them. Well, it works perfectly fine, up to the point where the configuration is a little bloaty, and it's more than you actually need for 2 or 3 servers. So take a look at that. Yeah, what I had is big and sometimes even complicated monitoring system, which can be difficult to configure just for very few services. So I spent hours and hours automating the process and configuring web interfaces to actually configure the system and so on and so on. Some systems, other than nagios, are even written in Java or something, which doesn't really fit on a tiny device. So instead I wanted just a quick check. Is port 80 open? Yes, okay, that's it. Or I also did not want to reinvent everything. I don't actually write the checks myself, so for my Q monitoring project, I rely on other people's checks they've already implemented. So basically, I steal all the check commands from the nagios project. Yeah, one thing I wanted to do is, well, for me, easy configuration is you start Vim or Emacs something with an ini file, you configure your services, that's it. No complicated web interface, no whatever, nothing complicated anyway.
So and that's what other people call complicated, what you call easy.
Yeah, well, for me it's easy. For other people, a web interface might be more suitable. But for this project, ini files is the way to go. Of course, in the end, I wanted to be alerted if something went wrong, like web service down, I need to get a message somehow. And it was supposed to be so lightweight that it runs on a Raspberry Pi, Beaglebone, in a virtual machine with only very limited memory, just things like that. So, let's go back. A nice overview page would be nice, and I decided to do one. We'll see that later on. So, little graphics. So the whole monitoring thing, let's have a look. That blue thing, that is my QMON. The notification is not done with QMON. All the different checks are not done with QMON, they're just called. That's about it. The QMON itself is not a daemon. I decided to just rerun it regularly with cron or even by hand. So the actual thing to be implemented was just a bit of a scheduling mechanism with a database backend. So it's not too complicated after all. And we'll see a bit of code later on. Once again, all these checks, like check HTTP, check secure shell, check TCP, something, they're already implemented with nagios or with any other monitoring toolkit. You can just steal them and call them, that's about it. So the thing is, on my Mac, I do have the latest TCL 8.6. And when I was done with all the programming, I started, worked perfectly fine, installed on my machine, which is, well, it was a Debian Wheezy, which is outdated now, but it was very current then. It had only TCL 8.5, so I was confronted with two choices. Well, actually three. I could have abandoned the project altogether, chose not to do that. Then I could have installed TCL 8.6, or I could just check what's missing. So I wrote that. Well, I do like all the new features, like LMAP and LSI and so on, but for that particular project only LMAP was relevant. So I just wrote, if LMAP is not found or has been renamed something, it'll just be defined like that. It's not a perfect match, because LMAP actually has a few different ways to be called, but for that particular project I'm using LMAP that way, so it's a very good replacement. It came to me because, well, the idea was stolen from Python, where it's possible to import from future. and then something, or from future import this and that. Actually, that's very similar. So it's basically a bit of a re-implementation from TCL functions. There is another one. Let's have a look. Okay. This is very small. Let's have it bigger. This one. Try. If try is not available, package require try. So it's 8.5 compatible. What I would have liked is just to say 8.5 compatibility mode, enter. But that's okay too. Well, close enough anyway.
But it would be no problem to put that all together in one file.
No, it wouldn't be. It's perfectly fine that way. But I wanted it to be 8.5 and 8.6 compatible.
Yeah.
And in a package require try would have done it as well.
It would, yes. Okay, let's have a look at the actual command execution. Let's go back to here. You can't see that. No, you can. I'm executing lots of commands. All these are shell commands. So is this. So I'm executing lots of commands. That's where the try and, well, that's where the package required try comes in. Looks like that. So the thing about nagios plugins is they return an error code, and based on the return code of the program or script or whatever, it's either successful or failure or error. So I had to trap it somehow. This case just says try, trap try status, and I've got the code. That's what I want. If something else happens entirely, I just set the code to 3, which is error. That's about it. Easy enough. So what else I needed was the output of the script. Was easily done. See the second line over there, set output read something. Well, so we've got it. Then, of course, I'm using SQLi again. Well, the table is basically created on the fly if it doesn't exist. It has all the things I need for the check and for defining the check in the first place. So, not really complicated after all. So what happens if I actually run the script? Looks like that. We'll come to the configuration layer next. So, what you can see here is, well, all the different checks and results, note the color, it's even colored output. Some checks even output some kind of status, like check SSH, puts out the secure shell version number or something. So works pretty well. Most of these checks are just dummies, just to show that the color output is working properly. And of course, there is also a little CGI script that does exactly the same thing as, well, as the command line output, but just not with the command line.
Beautiful.
Beautiful, yes. Eye candy, I'd say. Okay, as I said before, I do like editing ini files. So here we are. I've come up with an ini style configuration, very straightforward. You see a host definition over there called alpha, and then you can have several checks for the host. In that case, alpha SSH. You just use type host or type check, and then a few descriptions and a command. Command is just executed. That's it. Not too difficult. One thing you see is, well, there is some kind of substitution here. You can just replace alpha hostname, which happens to be alpha hostname, over here. But
Why do you have to mention alpha there? You have host is alpha in line 2 in alpha SSH already.
I might refer to something else entirely.
Oh.
Just like global variables, anything. Different checks even. You also have alpha SSH dot description or something. So, in the end, I ended up with kind of like this. So I do have several hosts. It all looks kind of similar enough that you would usually use a macro processing to automate the process. So just say alpha and the IP address is almost the same, the host name is almost the same. So most of you would probably use a TCL script and use the typical TCL script as configuration file. It's perfectly legitimate. I used something else. I came up with this kind of a macro processing kind of thing, where I say, okay, I define a template, I name the template, and then I have substitutions. And I name the substitutions, in that case, hostname IP, and they are getting substituted. So I can just use the templates and say, okay, use the template with these parameters. They can be nested even. It's easy enough. So in the end, we end up with the very same thing, but using templates. Let's have a look at the code again. The ini parser. Okay, you can't actually see this, but
So you wrote the ini parser yourself? You didn't use anything that's available?
this particular proc actually does what the entire ini package does, more or less, at least the parsing part. Just regex, another one, that's it. Well, I used it before, but due to the redundancy, I wanted the templating feature, so I implemented kind of a macro processing. Macro processing is done up here. It's not too complicated, as you can see. It's under 60 lines.
Yeah, okay, but it would be totally unnecessary if you use TCL syntax for your ini files. And I don't see the template mechanism does change anything.
Indeed, that is a valid point. Have you ever encountered someone else working with you who does not know any TCL at all, and is somewhat puzzled with TCL error messages?
Yeah, inconceivable.
Inconceivable. It's almost impossible. Everybody knows TCL, of course. So you can probably imagine that using a TCL script and actually executing or evaluating the TCL script would, if you made an error in configuring, would result in a TCL error message unless you catch it.
Yeah.
The second point are security reasons.
Yeah, of course, security reasons, but if you have access to the ini file, and if the ini file is there to configure commands to be executed, there is no point in security.
Security reasons if you use the safe interpreter as a slave interpreter.
Yeah, well,
okay, but
in the end, I found it easier to handle errors with a templating language rather than TCL as a language itself. Also, I preferred not to have people configuring the monitoring system being able to actually extend the monitoring system inside the configuration file. That would be unnecessary.
So you do the initial rendering to the ini file, no one else.
Well, in that particular case, my own project, so I'm the only one configuring that particular thing. But it's open source. You're welcome to. You're even invited to try it out if you like to. Well, play. That's basically it. It's uncomplicated monitoring. Thank you for listening, and please try it out. It's all on GitHub.
I still have a question. You know Monet?
I know it.
Okay.
I know Monet.
It didn't fit your needs?
Not quite.
Okay.
Not quite, no. And also, the Monet has a proprietary extension for clustering or something. And it all sounded like, well, you can use it, it's open source, but if you want anything beyond that, you have to pay us. Yeah. So I preferred not to use it.
Okay. Second thing is, what I've seen now in the presentation is mostly remote checks. So you have somewhere an instance running and checking a server of some kind, SSH, HTTP.
Yes, in my particular case, I'm running a Raspberry Pi that has a cron daemon running. The cron daemon regularly runs QMON, and the QMON runs all the checks.
Okay. And
they are remote checks, yes. Yeah. It's easily possible to just call SSH and then remotely check something, get the result code. That's not a problem.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
I mean, you have presented a lot of how you do it.
Yes.
I would be more interested in what you can do with it, or to see more examples. You know, I mean, myself, I see a lot of TCL code, and it's enough. It would be very nice to see the practical application in some examples, in order to motivate me to go to your page and download it.
Well, you're free to do so, or don't, as you prefer. Well, let's have a look. etc. Let's have a look at the configuration. I do have a sample configuration file here. Can you all read that? Is it too small? It's all right. Okay. I'm defining a plugin path where all the plugins are. It's my plugins and the nagios plugins. A default interval for running the checks. Not every time QMON is called, all the checks are executed, but only those which are not recently being executed, like 1 hour in that case. If something goes wrong or changes in that case, the notify CMD is executed, which happens to be an XMPP message sent, so I get the message by Jabber in that particular case. So I do have a host defined here, and a host defining is strictly optional. You don't actually have to use hosts just for convenience and to have more or less global data somewhat separated. I do have a secure shell check, so I just execute check SSH something 4 for IPv4. So if I actually call that particular check, or if I call QMON, it checks for a secure shell. It writes all the things back to the database, and the database can be read by the script, and it looks more or less exactly like shown in the screenshot. Just like that. And it shows secure shell, everything is in order. And even say, okay, it's protocol version something. So then if something went wrong or even changed, you'll get notified. I do have a few notification plugins. Let's have a look. Plugins. Notify, okay. You will notice that's not Tcl, it's Python, because, well, using XMPP with Tcl was so annoying. I tried it, honestly, but, well, Python just works. So it's just easy to interface Python or any language with this QMON, even though it's written in Tcl, it doesn't really matter. Then I do have another one called notify pushover. You can't really see anything useful in there. but it notifies to the pushover service. Don't know if you know it. Something like a mobile message thingy. But in theory, you can just notify anyone, write emails, call a script that does several things like actually look up who's to be notified before notifying anyone, or check the time, oh, it's too late, nobody's notified, something like that. Then I have implemented a few checks myself, where I thought the nagios checks itself are not quite sufficient, or they might have security implications. So I implemented an HTTP check. Let's have a look at the actual code. It's really hard to see where it actually is. Well, it's really lots of code. Okay, I can't really see anything with it. Well, what it does, it checks HTTP and checks if the checksum still is the same as before. I do have a mail server checking thing where it tries to send an email, and well, if the mail server returns with grey listing or something, it's probably an error. I do have a check for netstat. It calls netstat for listening sockets, UDP TCP on Linux. Parses the output to see if someone else opened up a socket. For example, well, if I have a shared host, someone else starts an IRC bouncer or a web server I don't want or something, I can just check the netstat, something else opens which I didn't configure before, gets alerted. Just like that. I do have a check for SSL labs. It's a remote service for checking for SSL vulnerabilities like Heartbeat or something. Just check with the website, they have an API. And of course, all the nagios checkers are available. Just call them, get the result, get notified if something happens. Then in the end, it's a bit easier to configure, from my point of view, than the actual nagios or Monit or a few others.
It's good to have a simple solution for small problems instead of always having the big thing, which is just not as handy. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, if you don't like it, you can still use something else.
Yeah.
But it works for me. It works pretty well now. That's it. Well, thank you for listening.
Yeah.